A while back, I covered the animated pilot Lackadaisy. Now, for those who don't know, Lackadaisy is you guessed it, animated pilot based on a comic series of the same name. The comic was created by artist Tracy J. Butler and started in, get this, 2006. What? It's that old? It also takes place in the 1920s, and it's not just in the 1920s for the sake of being in the 1920s. There's a lot of work and effort put into making sure that it's as accurate to the real world time as possible. And I really do admire this drive for accuracy. You can tell that Tracy J. Butler was legitimately really interested and passionate about the era. Now, initially, I wasn't really the hugest fan of the pilot. That was until I read the comic. After reading the comic, I have to say that my opinions on the pilot specifically are pretty much the same, only now I just understand them a lot better. The pilot is basically just about Rocky, Ivy, and Freckle going out to run an errand and then getting ambushed by gangsters, and the comic is that just over and over again, so it's pretty accurate. And look, it's not really a bad setup, but the comic spends a lot more time outside of the gangster situations. And for me, that's where the characters shine the most, in the mundane day-to-day life. Even Tracy J. Butler understood that with the non-canon series, which is meant to show characters that normally wouldn't interact getting along with each other. And sure, it might not be the most original concept, I'm sure others have done similar things before, but for Lackadaisy, it works. Most of the main characters work at a restaurant called the Little Daisy, which is actually a front for a secret alcohol trading business called the Lackadaisy, because alcohol is illegal now, because prohibition. And their rivals are the Marigold Hotel. Get it? Little Daisy? Marigold? They're both flowers. The Marigolds are led by Asa Sweet, and it's, I believe, currently implied that Asa killed Atlas, the former owner of the Lackadaisy, and also husband of Mitzi May, the current owner. That makes sense? Rocky, the main character of the series, isn't really all that lawful either. I wouldn't really call him insane, but he is very chaotic. He tends to make a lot of very irresponsible decisions, and he often ends up dragging his cousin Freckles down with him. But he's not really a mean-spirited or malicious individual either. He's more the result of when you combine misguidedness with an extreme passion for over-the-top theatrics. Rocky has been fired from several jobs beforehand, so now he's very dedicated to making sure he does what he needs for the Lackadaisy. At one point, while on a run, Rocky is injured, and for a brief moment he does admit that he, in truth, sees himself as an awful person, that a lot of the things he does he feels really guilty about. Rocky does love his cousin Freckle, but he chooses to show it the most unhealthy way possible. Speaking of Rocky's cousin, let's talk about Freckle. Freckle, at first glance, he seems like this very, nervous, shy, cautious individual. He doesn't really want to do crimes as much as Rocky and Ivy. But then, sometimes, out of nowhere, he becomes this psychotic murder machine, basically. Before the events of the series, Rocky tried to become a police officer, but got kicked out because of his psychotic tendencies, apparently. So what I think it is that because Rocky is always dragging Freckle into these dangerous situations, and, situations he doesn't really want to be in all that much, and maybe because he also had a very strict mom, he has all these, emotions bottled up inside of him that he doesn't want to release, but every now and then will release, and he'll go on all these rampages and massacres, pretty much. And if anything, Rocky does kind of encourage this destructive behavior because, well, enemy gangsters getting gunned down would be good for business. We do see his reaction after the rampage, but I feel like we don't really see it from his point of view enough. There's still a lot about his, I guess, condition that we don't really understand, and I feel like really needs to be explained. Explained, or at the very least, further addressed, but I think it probably will in some future comic or episode or something. I also feel like he goes back to the Lackadaisy a little too quickly, like maybe it should have been harder for Rocky to convince him to come back. I mean, like after an experience that traumatic, you'd think you want to stay away. Then we have Ivy Pepper, the third and final member of the Aaron Boy trio. Ivy is the goddaughter of Atlas, and unlike Freckle, she wants to get into dangerous situations. She wants to be a part of the gangster business. But apparently, as it turns out, opposites really do attract. In actuality, the whole thing was Ivy's idea. Really, it's less of a mutual thing and more her that likes Freckle. Initially, it was a very one-sided relationship, but over time, Freckle grew to like Ivy back. I thought their relationship was pretty cute, but it is still a side plot, so it's not really the main focus. Sure, Ivy is capable when needed, but that doesn't mean she's not in over her head. She may have bitten off more than she can chew with the gangster life. Then we have Victor. Victor is another employee at the Lackadaisy and also the surrogate father of Ivy. Victor has been a gunman for quite some time. He's even former partners with Mordecai, more on him later. On the surface, he seems very aloof and agitated a lot of the times, but there's a lot more to him than just that. Victor is a man who's seen a lot of bloodshed in his days, and now his surrogate daughter, Ivy, wants to live the same kind of life he did. He tries to hide what goes on behind the scenes from her, and ultimately he understands that it's best if she just stayed away from him. I'm gonna do the next two a bit quicker. First, we have Zib Zbowski. Zib is a jazz player and the coolest cat in the club. But he doesn't like how dangerous and illegal the Lackadaisy is slowly becoming. He refuses to accept blood money from Mitzi since they used to be in love with each other. Moving on to Mitzi's current love interest, Sedgwick Sable. Sedgwick is a businessman and frequent patron of the Lackadaisy. He means well, but he is very naive. And now the final member of the Lackadaisy crew, Mitzi May, the owner. Now, I actually have this incredibly crackpot theory that maybe it was actually Mitzi who killed Atlas, and like you might be thinking, if you like read the comic and everything, you're probably thinking, what? That makes no sense. There's no way it could be Mitzi, but exactly, that's what they want you to think. Mitzi is the last person you'd expect. It just, I mean, like, just think about it. It just makes so much sense. God. But I actually do think Mitzi may have killed Atlas. You see, very early on it is stated that she was a suspect in his murder, which makes sense, she is his wife, but then that whole thing never really comes back later on, so it's kind of weird to mention. And even as the story progresses, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, she seems nice enough. There's no way she could have, done something that horrible. But from the way she treats Sedgwick, seducing him and stealing his money to keep the business afloat, that does show that she is willing to get her hands dirty. Even Zib mentioned how she's acting a lot more irrational than he expected her to act. Look, I'm pretty sure it was Asa who killed Atlas, or it's said to be Asa, but we still never actually saw it happen. There's no direct confirmation. And Mitzi is known for being, like, kinda sus sometimes. I'm just saying, it can't be a coincidence. Now on to the Marigolds. I've already touched on Asa, so I'm not really gonna talk anymore about him. He's a douchebag, that's really all you gotta know. Next we have one of Asa's minions, Mordecai. Mordecai is a professional gunman who used to work for the Lackadaisy. In fact, he used to be old partners with Victor until he capped his knee. Mordecai was born into poverty and had been committing crimes since he was a teenager. With Mordecai, whether it be the way he kills his enemies or the way he eats his waffles, everything needs to be just right. Everything needs to be perfect. With him, the job must be done the quickest and most efficient way possible. Now, in contrast to that, they're then Mordecai's partners, the Savoy siblings. They're not actually related, though. They're just like two people that live together their whole lives and just kind of think of themselves as siblings, like whatever. That part doesn't really matter. Now, they don't really care how the job is done or how the target is eliminated or whatever, just as long as they have fun doing it. This leads to a lot of really great back and forth between them and Mordecai. But their dynamic takes a bit of a turn when the whole voodoo cult thing was introduced. You know what? Just don't even worry about that part. In conclusion, Lackadaisy is a really well-made comic with amazing art and fleshed-out characters. And you know something? The fact that they're cats doesn't really have a whole lot of impact on it. I think they use the word pause like once in the entire comic. Like, you'd think that with something like this, they would live in Meow Orleans instead of New Orleans or something like that. But no, for the most part, it is pretty much just a, like, story set in the 1920s. And yes, I have to admit I wasn't really the hugest fan of the pilot, since it did have to introduce pretty much everyone and everything all at once, and I do get that can be a hassle. There is a lot of dynamics and details that were never really specified in the pilot. And look, nothing against the pilot. There were definitely a lot of really talented people behind it. The voice cast, the animators, the music. Don't even get me started on the music. Projects like Lackadaisy are why the internet was made, and really it does warm my heart to see it getting this much attention. It's even going to be screened in theaters in California. Lackadaisy has definitely come a long way from just being a humble webcomic. But you don't need me to tell you that. Really, just go watch the pilot or read the comic. I definitely recommend you do. Update, update, extra, extra. Read all about it. While I was recording this video, the Lackadaisy trailer just straight dropped. So, here's that. And admittedly, the trailer was really interesting because it almost seemed to show or seemed to give Rocky more depth than we've seen in both the pilot and the comic. So if the series continues with that direction, then I'd be really excited to see what happens next. I will leave links to both in the description of this video, but until then, this has been Bradworst, signing off. Hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute, I don't think cat people existed in the 1920s. I think I found the first and only historical inaccuracy in this cartoon.